Quest podcast. In the last episode, we proposed a riddle, one that seems to be in conflict with the idea that jobs to be done can help us to understand why a customer prefers one product over another. It's this: people typically prefer chicken wings over chicken tenders. But by choosing the wings, they are selecting a product that is messier, more difficult to eat. So we explored this question and we thought about other markets that have similar patterns. Some in food come to mind: crab legs, oysters, lobster, where the more expensive, more desired product actually is more difficult to eat. It's more complicated. But also we talked about examples in a tractor market example and one installing electrical panels. So have we broken jobs to be done with this question where we realize a customer prefers a more complicated product, seemingly inferior? Well, we go deeper into the riddle with a discussion of emotional jobs. Is this what can save job to be done? Well, we'll find out as Jonathan asks Jan this very question.
And actually, maybe this is a good time now to move over to these emotional jobs, which we often also associate with higher level jobs, although I'm not sure that's necessarily always the case. Anyway, what are these emotional jobs? So, Jan, I know that, emotional jobs typically are split into social and personal emotional jobs. And Jan, I know that at Venbridge, at the consulting firm you work at, you're not big fans of emotional jobs. So could you maybe just tell us what an emotional job is in Jobs to be Done and why you have such negative emotions towards them?
All right. Okay. So very nice. Okay. So I think the core idea in Jobs to be Done is that there is something like a threefold distinction. Like you have three different, or that at least is what I've always read is kind of the three distinctions when it comes to job. There is kind of the key job that is relevant for innovation, or one of the most relevant for innovation, which is the so-called functional job. So the functional job is very often at the core of what you're doing. Then there are social, so as you pointed out, social jobs and emotional jobs. Now, the way I picked this up was the idea is that you have a given functional job, but there is always social things around it. So, for example, I don't know, you want recognition from others, you don't want to impress peers, things like that. So these are not purely functional in the sense that they, for example, don't really solve a problem, but they just go along or kind of are around the job. And then emotional jobs are something like, and I think this is maybe they came in to try to solve these riddles that we're talking about, this, I don't know, feeling happy or feeling, appreciated and stuff. So having certain kinds of emotions along doing the functional job. I hope this is kind of fair. So Scott, if you disagree, probably you have much deeper knowledge of these distinctions. But
sorry, I was gonna say, yeah, I think you're right. I think they were sort of created because they didn't address these things. I think we've had a pretty good discussion of trying to really get to the core of, and the original thought was they were something called a related job, meaning while I'm doing job A, I'm also trying to do job B. So while I'm cooking a meal, I am also trying to feel like a good provider. But that's different than what you just described. And by the way, so it's very interesting. Well, one thing I just on a personal level, like Jan and I have the exact same perspective on this. And why is that interesting? It's interesting because it's very much a minority view. Much, if you read Jobs to be Done stuff, it's described as you have functional jobs, and then you have these related jobs of emotional jobs, social and personal jobs in which you want to feel something or be perceived in a certain way. But Jan and I, the position I have, which I think is the same as Jan's, is it's really these emotional jobs. These are higher level.
Yes.
In other words, so here's the difference. The more typical position is, it's a related job. So that means I'm cooking a meal. While I'm cooking a meal, I also want to feel like a good provider. That's the related job perspective. The hierarchy is I'm cooking a meal for my family, which is a solution that helps me to better feel
Yes.
like a provider, which helps me to better feel something or be perceived as something. And so it's more than semantics. It's a completely different way of looking at it. And in that the emotional job actually is is what somebody's trying to accomplish. So the functional jobs become solutions to accomplish the higher level job. And it was hard for me to turn loose of that related job idea because it was all I knew for the longest time, but it just didn't make sense. I mean, it didn't pass these riddles.
I totally agree with you, Scott. I think that I never really liked this idea of related job. I think that it's the relationship to the job is actually much more well defined. It really, you're doing this in order to do this. It's really the core job you're looking at is a stepping stone towards something which is more a high level job, an abstract job. So typically we have emotional jobs are broken down into the personal jobs, so how people want to feel in any given circumstance, and the social jobs, how people want to be perceived by others. Do you think so? From what I gather from you guys, maybe you can correct me, but is that I understand that you don't believe that people can pursue a personal job, so in and of itself. Am I correct in assuming this? So personal job, wanting to feel a certain way. So you're saying it's always associated with a functional job.
I would say theoretically you can target anything. You could target, like in my opinion, that's not hampered by any research or anything other than my opinion, is that the top level job for any individual is to be at peace. So theoretically, you could study that. What are all the challenges you have being at peace? It's just a heck of a huge thing to tackle. It's just practically speaking too large. That's like going into a business. Their top one is be profitable. Tell me all the challenges you have being profitable. It's just practically speaking, as a research, there's nothing in the jobs to be done theory that says you cannot study anything anywhere. But practically speaking, it's just a mess because it's just too big. So it's more of a practical research decision. Well, what do we do as a company that we could actually help somebody to feel at peace? And what are our capabilities? And what sub job, maybe it's get better sleep or something, or whatever that we would tackle. So it's not that jobs to be done as a theory says you can't do anything. It's just practically it's just too big to study. I don't know. What would you say, Jan?
No, I agree. I mean, for some cases, if let's assume that, for example, being at peace is there are solutions for this. I mean, we use them all the time. We take a break, or we go to a seminar somewhere. We we relax, or we listen to music. So it's always at play. But I think, and you're 100% right, Scott. So for most cases, this is it's too abstract. It's what do you do? How does that help you inform the product strategy for the next 3 to 5 years? Like, there's no actionability there. But the way I think you phrased it was, can you kind of pursue them just for the sake of themselves, or just do only the job of trying to be
I think
peace,
there are two different things I'm saying. So, or two different questions. So the first one is, the first one is maybe not so well thought out, but it was based on the idea that I know that you at Venbridge don't really like the idea of emotional jobs. I just wanted to understand.
Add on this as well, yeah.
I wanted to understand why, and that was the first thing. And the second one, I think it connects back to this idea of autotelic activities, which is, can one actually really pursue a personal job in and of itself? And I think that's a very deep and interesting question. And I mean, we can either talk about it now or wait a bit later.
No, I can. Okay, let me maybe just, I'll say a little bit about both and I try to be brief. But the first one, and I didn't add this, and I wonder if you two would agree. But so one thing I think that emotional jobs and social jobs, this distinction is very difficult to make. So they are usually getting they're very fluid. So I always had a hard time kind of keeping them apart. And then we really, really sat down and had a long thought about what are exactly emotions. And then what we came up with, or kind of what our thinking right now, is that emotions are not something like a goal that you go after. Emotions are a reaction to how something goes. So what we completely do away with is the idea of saying there is something like an emotional job. We do not believe this. I don't believe that there is something like an emotional job. Emotions play a huge role, but they are a reaction to something. So yes, you can say that you want to pursue, for example, I don't know, moments of feeling happy, which would be something like an outcome. So you kind of want to have, but then this feeling of being happy is an outcome, is kind of, it's a reaction to how the job is basically done, how the solutions get your job done. Now they play a huge role and they are a factor in all of this, but I don't think it just in and of itself, there is something like emotional jobs. So that is kind of our view on this, and why we kind of did away with these distinctions and just said, okay, they are always involved. So there is a hierarchy that, just as Scott explained, there's a hierarchy that where you higher up you go, the more kind of abstract, emotional, whatever you want to call it gets. But there is also something, and Scott, you alluded to this, is there's also something like a universal element of just kind of basic human jobs that we want to do, which are also always associated with any job that you do. So this might lead me to your second question. I'm having a hard time trying understanding this notion of just in and of pursuing something just in and of itself. Like, and maybe this is my limited jobs to be done perspective, but I think pursuing something in and of itself gives you a lot. I mean, I read weird philosophy books and talk with my friends about them, and it has no direct practical use. I just love the activity of trying to understand what somebody else thinks. But I mean, there is a huge reward in this. There is something like, there is also a part of, it helps me to escape. So it's, some people go to the gym. Well, I do too, but I read also books. So escaping from everything. So I maybe we should give a little bit more into this notion of what do you mean by this, just pursuing something in and of itself.
I think one of the challenges with pursuing one of these higher jobs is now you have to be prepared that your competition is every other way to do that. So, yes. So just, you mentioned reading a book and going to the gym and taking a nap. All of a sudden, this is your competition, and it's just so it just sort of technically you could chart it out. What are all the different? Let's just go at be at peace. What are all the solutions to be at peace? And but it's darn near. I mean, you could eat junk food. You could listen to a podcast, a very good one like Product Quest podcast, for example. I mean, you could play with your kids. You can play with just the list of the competition list gets to be such a disparate difference of things. So it's not like jobs you done breaks down. It's just the practical implication of understanding it. I just read a book and just finished it. It's called How Emotions Are Made. I was just looking up the author's name. Her name is Lisa Feldman Barrett. And it's a pretty good book, but there was one idea that just sort of stuck with me. And her position is, here's where an emotion comes from, is that the brain makes a prediction about something, and then it takes in feedback as for what actually happens. So it's just that we're talking about food. So you have a prediction of what this is going to taste like, and you take a bite, and then you take a real signal. Now the difference in that prediction and the real signal, that's where the emotion comes from. Imagine opening a present, right? Oh, nice. Your brain predicts how you're going to feel, I guess, or your satisfaction, whatever. Yeah. And then you have and based on the difference in prediction and the reality creates an emotion. Now she goes into a lot more detail about naming emotions and difference in words from emotions across cultures. And it's a massive field unto itself.
How emotions are made?
How emotions are made. Lisa Feldman Barrett.
That sounds like a very interesting read.
And she mentioned a guy, Antonio Damasio, quite a bit.
The Santa Fe Institute, I think.
Yeah,
and
that was another one of my takeaways. Is I want to go deeper into some of his writings as well. I told one of his stories in my book. I won't go into it now. I don't think it's relevant, but that whole idea of the brain makes a prediction, and then after
that's very
experiences it taking a signal, and the emotion is built on essentially comparing those two. I don't know if you call them.
That's very nice.
Two values.
Yeah, so you start thinking about how to build a better widget, and you end up reading stuff about, complexity theory and stuff like that. That's how it goes. That's happened to me. So anyway, maybe just to bounce off, Jan, get back to your question. So what is exactly an autotelic activity? I've given an explanation, but maybe with a few examples, it might help. I think the epitome of an autotelic activity is basically consuming art. So, for instance, consuming or making art, actually, I would say. So you will watch a movie. There's no functional benefit. Of course, you could say spend time with my kids or whatever, but that's kind of, for me, avoiding you can definitely just enjoy watching a movie for the experience of watching a movie. You can enjoy listening to a piece of music just for the experience of listening to a piece of music. And the same way, similarly, if you're making art, you can sit in your room, like just sitting in your room. I know, Scott's got a guitar. I play bass. You can should make a band one day. But anyway, you can just sit in your room, play your instrument, and get a lot of pleasure out of it. And there's no other point to it than the pleasure you get from playing it. And those are examples of autotelic activities.
Yeah. Sorry, one of the challenges of this conversation is there's so many things I keep wanting to go back to. So I'll go back to one now. When you mentioned the autotelic, that's a neat word. But I wrote down, you said something you enjoy just for the sake of doing it, and even if it makes it more difficult. I reflect on, like, why does anybody ever go backpacking? Why do you carry all your stuff with you? Hike all these miles, doing something that, again, if it's sort of the chicken, maybe this will be forever known as the famous chicken wing test, because you applied all these different examples of where you're expending more energy. But I go out west with a group, a few guys. We go fishing out, we go backpacking every summer, and I'm going to be completely honest, so we go to Yellowstone or some park. And so we've got all our stuff. We're going into the backcountry. And as we're going, you'll see the folks there for the weekend, or they're just hiking, half a mile in and out. And if I'm totally honest, we're probably looking down our nose at them a little bit, like, they're barely even, they're not the real. And of course they have all this. So this is grizzly country. And so they'll have all this grizzly bear spray and all these precautions, and they'll have bells dangling, and they're never out of sight of their car. But there's some satisfaction in doing hard things, in saying, you know what, we're doing something that's difficult. We're carrying our water, we're filtering our water, we're doing, and just for the something in the joy of it. So that was one of the, you mentioned, Jonathan, challenge versus autotelic. What would you say the differences in between those two?
That's a great question, because I was actually going to try and push my little theory on this, and I was wondering how when I would get a moment to get into that. So you mentioned backpacking. A typical example I find quite fascinating also is the idea of mountain climbing. That's a typical example. It's one of those classic examples people talk about, right? Someone who's mountain climbing, if you say to him, hey, we can just take the lift or whatever it's called, the cable car or helicopter or something. Say, no, I don't want to take that. But you want to get to the summit, right? Yeah, but I actually want to go through the snow and get cold hands and risk dying to do it. And it's a really, really strange phenomenon of why people do this, right? And so I actually have kind of a theory, and it relates to what you just asked me, or asked us, I would say, but I'll just give my opinion. So what is the difference between challenge and autotelic? Well, I believe that actually a challenge, so we maybe don't even have a word for this, but I think the emotion you get from solving or overcoming a challenge is a kind of, it's a kind of emotion. It's part of the autotelic activity. So I believe that different types of autotelic activities and a different type. So and these are very much related to the hacking of emotions. So that's kind of my theory. So so you get a certain positive emotional feedback from achieving a difficult objective, from solving a challenge. You also get a positive emotion from playing an instrument alone in your room. You get a positive emotional feedback from seeing a nice movie or watching. And I believe that this is basically, and I think you alluded to this earlier, Scott. It's kind of the reason why we get a positive emotional reaction is because somehow this has served us in the past. I believe these emotions, and Jan, you also talk about emotions guiding our behavior in some way. It kind of tells you, okay, you're kind of on the right path, this is something that from an evolutionary perspective is something like. So, I mean, you're a philosopher, Jan. I'm sure you've gotten into these discussions of, what's the point of music and why do people like music and all this stuff. And I think it's basically a hacking of something that was there for another purpose. And somehow music hacks this purpose that was originally there. So we developed a liking for music for some reason, or for some sounds and music. It's like a nice cake that plays on our lust for sugar. We love sugar for evolutionary reasons, and now we have companies that basically hack our taste buds, so they'll put just enough salt and sugar in something so that you find it really good, and I think that's where it comes from, in my opinion. Yeah,
it's really good. I wrote down what you said on how you look at how something has served us in the past, and I just couldn't help but just add that, or just connect that, I should say, to what the point from that. How emotions are made, where when something happened at the surface in the past, that gives us the ability to make a prediction, right? And then we predict. So you played guitar in the past, so you're predicting what that experience is like. And then when you actually play, how well it matches with that. There's an emotion from from that. And
it actually resonates. And I want to just again, a disclaimer. This is total kind of speculation. I don't want to, but there's this. It reminds me a bit of this notion of loss function or cost function in machine learning. So in machine learning, we train computers by basically giving them some kind of reward or cost. It means there's two faces of the same coin, and you then make the computer improve its model by punishing it or rewarding it if it does something well or badly. Yeah, and I think somehow when you were talking about this description of emotions, it did remind me a bit of that idea.
And the other thing, it just occurs to me, there's just this experiencing things. It's just like the things you experience is too big to be a job in a way. I mean, although I guess it technically is. I mean, we're talking about backpacking. I remember a trip. So we were one of our fly fishing trips. We were on the CDT. It's the Continental Divide Trail. It goes from Mexico to Canada through the Rocky Mountains. And at where we were just like, we just went to sort of a base camp. Then we were fly fishing every day. Okay. But from that same place, there was another group of two people coming through the same trail, and they were going like 25, 35 miles a day. and they were super efficient. You know, they were eating disgusting things. They weren't cooking it. They were literally, this guy took tuna and potato flakes and disgusting stuff, mixed it in a peanut butter jar and drank it. It was pure, but everything was about efficiency. The mentality was more like a marathon runner. They were trying to accomplish it as fast as possible. Now, then there's another group. We saw a family traveling together, taking their time, seeing the sights, you know, enjoying the nature. So, and then there's us. We just hiked a little ways and we're just fishing. So you have three different groups of people using the same solution, but the jobs we were accomplishing are not even remotely the same. I mean, the difference in enjoying time with your family versus, you know, really taking on a challenge, like how fast can we go from Canada to Mexico versus spend time with our family. Those are not remotely even close to each other, but yet it's using the same product, which goes back to Jan's comment about this fallacy of thinking of a one-to-one job to product relationship.
Yeah. But I think here maybe there's probably different ways. I mean, in one sense, we try to break jobs to be done as well. And I think in a certain way here, at least it shows kind of the limits. So at some point, I think at some level, you have to ask yourself, what do you use the theory for? Because just for, explaining all these different kinds of using the trail, let's say, the solution is kind of that trail. You're very likely to end up with a list that is just, just as you showed, it's huge. So, but then you have to ask yourself, what is it exactly that we want to explain? I mean, what do we want to, what is here our purpose? And I think the same maybe is true for these autotelic things like playing music, because, let's admit it, jobs to be done, I think, and that's part of why it is so great, has, in a sense, a clear, how should we call this? A clear bias to finding, to commercialize stuff, to kind of get an output. It's brutal to say, but it's the truth. Get an output out of people in a way so you can commercialize it.
We're trying to build successful businesses.
Well, to build successful businesses, to build great products. Now, on the one hand, that I think directly shows you also the limits, and we've been talking about the limits of jobs to be done, and as well maybe of people, because maybe it's even hard. All of these aspects of autotelic things, or I just like it, or I enjoy doing it, are also things that people, and I myself included, struggle to articulate. Like, am I myself even fully aware of why I like to play the guitar? I don't, but so I think there is limits maybe to how much you can get out of somebody, because they themselves might be somewhat unaware, or it's hard to articulate what it is exactly that is driving your own behavior. If you take the jobs to be done perspective and you have a commercial interest, then I think that's why it's so great, because it's hyper-focused and you get exactly the output of a human being that you want, that will help you later on create great products. But to a certain extent, probably it doesn't. If you wanted to explain all of human behavior, then it's too much. I think that it's just it cannot do this.
Yes, Jan. But then I ask you the following.
Maybe, I don't know.
If you say this, I would contend that you're basically excluding a major chunk. I don't know if it would be 50% or what, but basically a very big chunk of what a lot of businesses are built on. Any business that's built on Coca-Cola, okay, I know. Food companies, film industry, all these people have built entire industries on this. And you're telling me that basically they should not be using jobs to be done.
Now we have to make a distinction. Well, I think they should not be focusing too much on these autotelic things. Now, are there biological factors in human beings that jobs to be done has no way of finding these, that just play a role in how people consume things? Sugar, you can find this somewhat if you do an actual job. We did a lot about chocolate. And because we now as a society know that there is sugar in those things, we can express it in that way. So people are able to say, I like a Snickers and I like the sugar rush and I like the energy it gives me. So we kind of learned, because we know now what it is about. But some of the things might be so biological and that drive a certain kind of behavior. You might not get this from jobs to be done alone. So yeah.
I was going to jump on that last thing. It's not that it can't help, but it might not be sufficient. It might not be the only thing. We had a great conversation with Indy Young, who has a very intense qualitative method. I could imagine, combining a method like that with sort of a jobs to be done. But the thing that really worried me that about the chicken fiddle is the big statement is that with jobs to be done is, customers, they know what their needs are. They know what the errors are. So if I ask somebody, why do you prefer, chicken wings over chicken tenders? I expect them to be able to give me answers.
Yeah.
And I got freaked out a little bit when I was asking myself that, and I was a little slow to come up with things. So it's, I think I'm just going to go back to just build on what Jan said. I do think, I think you can always we're having this conversation. We're having a jobs conversations all the way up, all the way to the top and back down. I think as practitioners, we're probably very much in the mode of working with our clients to come back down, right? To focus on something, which is different than the hypothetical question. Could you do it?
Yeah.
Enough sufficient budget. And I think here's where I think my final statement on it would be for anyway, or at least my position as of this time on whatever day today is that here's the good thing. It gives you this framework to have that discussion to begin with. It's still what are we comparing jobs to be done to? Oh, it's just American culture. Oh, they like it better, and so it's still you're able to better have a good to better understand it than just essentially you're just giving up. Oh, it's just what people like. Okay, why do they like it? Because they like it. I mean, that's not very. That's true.
What do you do with that answer?
Not very helpful. Not very helpful. And I think jobs to be done can help you to see if the job you're studying, help you to understand how difficult it is. Maybe part of this thing with the chicken wing is it really is difficult. And with jobs to be done, even though it doesn't, I think we could definitely, we could come up with, using jobs thinking, we could come up with some hypotheses of why somebody would. And maybe the thing is we're so much in what a typical jobs to be done quant survey is. Maybe for these more sophisticated things, more complex, we're sort of stuck in that way of thinking. Maybe the survey looks different. Maybe the question, maybe there's something needs to be different about that. But we have been able, even though we haven't fully explained it, we have been able to have a pretty good conversation with jobs to be done thinking sort of as our vocabulary. So I think there's a lot of value in that.
I completely agree. And I just want to, now that we've talked so much about this, I'm coming up maybe with a kind of, I just want to test this out. So what I'm very used to, and I think this alludes, I completely agree, Scott. I have to say, I have a study in mind. I know how you do it, blah, blah, blah. But okay, so in a very, let's say the sophisticated way of doing jobs done, you would actually go out, explore the job, gather all the criteria that people have to measure success, and then put that into a quant study to see which of those are actually relevant. Relevance can be measured in any kind of way, but you would say, okay, which of these are really important of these metrics and which are not yet fulfilled. So with the chicken wing example, it kind of, now it makes me think, and usually what we do, we tell our clients, at least that's what we do, is say, focus on the things that are important. just focus on the stuff that's important and not fulfilled, of course, but like focus on the stuff that's important. But it could be that if you would do a survey and you put in all those things that are nice about chicken tenders, for example, that your hands stay as clean as possible during the meal, that you have to use your hands as rarely as possible while consuming the food. I don't know. So you see what I mean? Like that, for example, that it happens as rarely as possible that somebody else at the table steals something from your from your plate, which kind of tends to happen with chicken wings. So these are kind of all could be measures or outcomes, or how you want to call them. We call them job metrics that people use to judge different solutions. Now, to the people that love chicken wings, all of these are unimportant. They would rate these as complete. I don't care. That's not important to me. That my hands stay as clean as possible. So
yep.
Maybe there is also value in looking at what kinds of people do judge a certain set of outcomes to be unimportant. Maybe that's a way of, I don't know. So I would have to think about this a little bit more, but then maybe this could be a way of explaining also, why do you take up hardship trying to go up a mountain? That it takes as little time as possible to reach the top. If I want to enjoy the hike up, completely unimportant to me. That you have to go through as little hardship as possible to something like that, completely unimportant to me. Yeah, so maybe we're here in a different.
So I think maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe I'm slightly more optimistic than you guys, and I'll try to explain why. So as I kind of tried to explain my position early on, I think human beings have developed proxies in a way, and I think we can consider probably emotions as kind of proxies for good behavior. Okay, so it's maybe for some kind of okay, I'll just keep that there for the moment. So it very well could be, if we go back on the chicken wing example, and I think you floated this idea, Scott, at some point, and I thought that was quite an interesting idea. This idea that maybe when we were sitting around the fire 100,000 years ago or something, there's something that is just embedded in us, that's in our DNA, that we like having something in our hands to eat. And I think there might be something to it, because if you think about the times before we had tables and nice plates and knives and forks, which of the two would have the most functional advantage? Would it be the tender, or would it be the chicken wing? Well, I would definitely say it's much more practical to eat a chicken wing when you don't have a knife and fork than to eat a tender. And so I think maybe, and this is this idea of proxy, maybe this is total invention, right? But I mean, if this is true, we could imagine that we enjoy eating chicken wings because we, in the past, developed a preference for the functional side of chicken wings, that we could keep it, no one could steal it. I don't know, something like this, and therefore we have developed this preference for the chicken wings. So where I'm more optimistic than you guys, I think so all these things, tastes, the struggle, all these things we've discussed that are kind of hard to put in terms of jobs to be done. Why couldn't you say, as a company, like we were talking about chocolate before, that the job of for example, if you're making chocolate, is to eat a good tasting chocolate? I mean, why is that not a valid job that you could set down? And then the question is, okay, good tasting. Well, then of course you need to figure out what that means. It doesn't mean you can. It requires more work to define what that means. But there are people who actually go and design the best tasting chocolate. I mean, they are doing this in some way. They use they use focus groups. They use all sorts of things. So this is, I want to eat a good tasting chocolate, I mean, that I don't see necessarily anything wrong with this. Good tasting is subjective. It's maybe something that's a remnant of our past, that, as you know, there's no objective functional, anything functionally better about a good tasting versus a non-good tasting chocolate today, but maybe in the past there was. So you have to just tailor whatever you're trying to do to those quirks of human nature that we've inherited from our past. That's where I'm a bit, I would say, it lies the optimism in what I'm saying. So actually, I was going to end. I think we can slowly wrap this up. I was going to end this with two questions that are a bit more concrete, which are, but maybe we've already covered it. So should a musician, when he's composing some new piece of music, think about the job of the people who are going to listen to his music? That's the first question. And the second question, concrete also, what is the job of the conversation we've had together right now? Or more generally, what is the job of conversation?
I was fearing that second question. I
what
knew
is
it
the
was
job
there.
of a conversation?
Wow, that's okay. Let's go back through those. So what was number one again?
So should an artist, musician, composing a piece of music, think about the job that he's solving and the desired outcomes, etc., of the people who are going to listen to his music?
Okay, that's one. What was the second one?
Second one is, what is the job of a conversation? And there's a thought process behind that, which I can tell you why I'm asking that question. I don't have an answer, but I can.
Why the hell are we doing this?
Yeah, and I don't mean this particular conversation.
No,
I mean conversation in general.
Yeah, got it.
Okay, so who wants to go first?
I'll jump.
Go. Yeah.
So I think, should an artist think about the job done of people? I think is a question that artists should ask themselves, to which they may come up with different answers for different pieces of music. The sort of depends who the beneficiary is, to use the jobs to be done word. Is it themselves, or is it the audience? There's a different question, is which decision. So they might choose themselves to please or please the audience. A different question is which is more likely to be effective. If, in other words, if you try to, I think people will really like this music. Will they? It's just this is again an opinion, unfettered by any research, but my opinion might be, if they make music that they personally like, it's more likely to communicate, to be received well, than if they particularly, I think people will like this. But I think there's certainly room in music for both, right? You have artists that just make music for themselves and people like it, and then there's certainly a business of music. I think the most obvious example, like they would put these boy bands together. They select all the people, these good dancers and singers, and they're trying to create a product. So I think it depends on the individual's job to be done. Are they trying to create a product, or are they trying to create art, for which, just in creating art, you're taking a risk? Well, if they're creating it, first of all, they're going to get that enjoyment of creating it, but they're taking a risk. Somebody may or may not appreciate it. I think it's similar to comedy. I think if they're going to make a joke, if a comedian's going to write a joke, for something to be funny to somebody else, it needs to be funny to themselves. Like, for all of us create presentations, sometimes I'll practice a presentation, I'm like, man, this is so boring. And I'll read something I've written, say, man, this is so boring. If it's boring to me, it's certainly going to be boring to anybody else. But anyway, I'll turn it over to you, Jan.
So on the artist question, I think it's a really interesting one. And I think a lot of what Scott said, I would 100% agree. But I feel like most of artists generally do care a lot about how their art is received. So I think it's kind of this idea that we have that the artist sits somewhere in. I mean, I know a little bit about mostly painting. So that's what I was for a long time interested in from a philosophical perspective. And I think most artists, they really care about how they are received. Now, on the other hand, it's very true that quite often, if a painter is too radical, I mean, they're looked upon as that what they do is garbage. So clearly what they produce, And then 50 years later, we love them for the paintings that they've done. I mean, it's the same in music. So very often, if art evolves or new art comes out, it goes against the general taste of the society. And I mean, they believe it's this isn't music, it's trash or whatever it is. I mean, rock and roll was the same thing. I mean, when that came up, the reaction was like, that's noise, that's not music. But anyway, but I think in general, yes, they should consider this. But I think an artist also has a different job. I mean, they kind of want to move. Most of them are on a kind of mission. They want to move art itself. I mean, they want to push art forward. And that maybe that's kind of the emotional gap as well. They're too far ahead very often. And by the way, that happens very often with innovations as well. So it's not because that the innovation is bad, but it's too far ahead. So, or the idea, I mean, there's all of these examples where kind of this remote talking to each other and all of that stuff was already around. Something like the iPhone and iPad was laying around already, but it might have actually been too early. So it's too far off the general development, and then it's considered as weird so I think there is this element, but in general, artists, I think they should do, and they do care about how they are received, and they should be doing this much more. So the conversation that we had with Ruth, was just about kind of the marketing of an artist, but I think it will really help also staying relevant in a sense. Of course, you can always pervert this in a sense, so putting these boy bands together but that's the question of, do you want to appeal to what's your target audience? Do you want to go for, it's the same with movies, right? So you can create a blockbuster and the general storyline, we know the general storyline. But that's what appeals to the masses. Yeah,
I agree with everything you guys have said. Firstly, I would like to say that I really believe these questions are actually, they seem like fringe questions, but I think they're extremely relevant. And the reason they're relevant is because I don't believe any one product, whatever it is purely a functional product. I think there are aspects of artistry in a tractor. There's artistry. People choose cars based on how they look, and stuff like this. I mean, so these questions I really think are extremely important. So that's the first thing I would say. Jan, you said that artists care about how people receive their work. I totally agree. They care about it. But I that's kind of a yes/no situation. Okay, either people, or maybe not yes/no, but I mean, either they like it or they don't like it. But it doesn't really say why, why they will like something or not. And I think, Scott, you said, and I think what I really resonate with is, you said when you're doing a presentation, if it's boring to me, it's boring to anyone else. And for me, I think is probably where there's some kind of glimpse of, in my opinion, an interesting kind of way out of these conundrums, and there's a kind of solution. So the problem, I think, with all these things we've discussed with art and producing art, etc., is that there's not really any logical reason. It's not as logical as for a more functional product. So for making a piece of music, there's no really logical reason why one piece of music is better than another piece of music. I think it's just a matter of how things are. Some people, some music touches our souls and some music doesn't. And it's just the way things are. And as we discussed, I think this comes probably from some evolutionary reason that, we resonate more with this or that kind of sound. And also, obviously, there's a cultural component and what we're used to, obviously, all that. But I think the main point is that it's not as logical as, for example, I can't cut a piece of meat with a hammer, right? It doesn't work because it doesn't cut. I think here we're talking about proxies. So as we're one step removed from the functional benefit of whatever it is we're doing, it's not really, there's no logical explanation. So in conclusion, I believe that the way forward, and this is what I think most artists would do, is that you have to do, firstly, kind of empirical research, meaning you have to put stuff out there, see how it resonates with people, and change it around. And a great shortcut is, we're all human beings. We are very different. We're all unique, but we also have many things in common. So, and there I get back to your slides example. A great shortcut to this is do stuff that you really like. And probably as you're quite alike to other human beings, then you will hit on those, you will hit those proxies. You will hit the probably the right spots for people who have a similar build as you have. And that, I think, would be how I would summarize it. Yeah.
Isn't that a little bit what happened to us? I mean, Scott wrote the book just like you wanted to put this out, and we kind of found you through that. Like, so it reminded me a lot of that.
I was thinking that, and in earlier versions, that's interesting you say that, because in earlier I was trying to write it for other people, but it was but then I was like, I mean, it didn't work. It didn't work, and I was like, I need to understand this myself. I need to change what I'm doing and do it for me. And if nobody else finds it, but at least I'm organized my thoughts. But originally, oh man, it went through so many different phases.
By the way, the book is The Statue in the Stone. You should go
brilliant book.
Yes,
go buy it.
So I guess I'll share this real quickly. So the original thing, it was the thing I started working on. It's 2012. It was something about, I guess I probably started on about 2009, believe it or not. But it was just like end-to-end product development, right? And then like end-to-end everything you need to know. But then I found that some things had lots of depth and some things had little depth. It's like, wow, these things that have a lot of depth, that's what I'm really interested in. And you know what? That's probably the things I really have something to say. I don't know that for roadmaps or for idea generation. I know the methods, the popular things, but I don't add a lot to it. I had absolutely zero to it. So this is the one thing I thought, well, I've got more interest here. And so I just sort of doubled down on what I was interested in and who cares, and which is but then that was the best thing ever. Cause then I find people like you guys that are crazy like me and have to talk for 2 hours about emotional things. But yeah, I've got this one, I know we're getting close to the end of time, but I've got this word I've written, and I think relates to these higher level jobs. And well, first of all, our big question was, does jobs to be done break on this riddle? Does it break on the iceberg of emotions? And so I don't think it does. I think it is incomplete. I think the parts of it that we understand and that have been proven are in a certain area. And I think it's just parts of it that have not been developed. Maybe it's just me being overly optimistic, but I think the things that I think with this conversation, we've gone a long way to explain, or at least to shine a light on, hey, it's not as good here, and there. I just think it's incomplete, and so I'm not writing off hope that it couldn't be improved or some new language or something added. And then the big word I have on my paper is identity. Identity. I think something about the emotions we feel has something to do with how consistent anything we react, how much it threatens or reinforces our identity. And the example that comes to mind is really stupid, but I remember being a little kid, like 5 years old, and I was in this play, and my mom had made me go in this play. And she said, you have to wear tights. You have to wear tights. Like, well, I don't want to wear tights. Girls wear tights. And I was a good kid, but I just was so angry. And she drags me to this play, makes me wear tights, and nobody else was wearing tights. And I was humiliated. And it was because my pride, my identity was just not only, I wouldn't have liked it by myself with nobody, much less in front of everybody my 5-year-old self knew. So I think when things are, so switch that to fly fishing. Like when I'm fly fishing, wow, this experience of hiking and doing hard things, that's very consistent with what I imagine my identity to be. It's so consistent with it. And of course there's visceral rewards. The water's great. I mean, there's certainly fun in catching the fish and just the whole experience. But everything about doing those hard things, it's very consistent with my identity. And I feel like that is part of this equation of, going back to this, how emotions are made. So she said, we predict something and there's something actual. So if I predict something is going to be consistent with my identity, and if it is, then I'm pretty good. If not, then I'm not. And one thing I love about Venbridge's method is you really double down this word pain. And I like that idea, because the further away from my identity I'm pulled, the more painful that is. Functionally, if I'm trying, to go something very functional, if I'm trying to do something quickly, the longer it takes, I feel more pain. So anyway, I think I've said a bunch of stuff there, but anyway, so just sort of summarize, I don't think Jobs Be Done breaks. I think it's incomplete. And I think it just seems to me there's some clue about what's missing in this idea of being consistent with how we perceive ourselves.
It's very interesting. It's very Aristotelian view, by the way. So maybe that's kind of a recommendation for the next reading list. But I agree. So I think, and maybe we should also be asking ourselves. So this is just a thought I now have. Like, at what point do these questions where we feel like Jobs Be Done is incomplete come back in? So are they relevant, for example, in the moment? I mean, maybe we can take a radical view and say, okay, at the very beginning of something like an innovation project, we do not care about emotions, but because everything, all of these things are then really tied to the product. I would at least, or it's strongly, we're very much on the solution side of things. So maybe there is a place or an addition once we get to the solution side of things where we can. So I completely agree with you, Scott, where we can add something, or where it kind of needs a kind of an extension to Jobs to Be Done to capture that as well. So I agree. It really allowed us to have this conversation, and it's also good to see the limits. I mean, any method has its pros and cons. Any method has its limitations. If you're irrespective of these, the method is useless. And so that's why I think also that's why Jobs Be Done is so powerful, because it's very specific as a method in a certain sense. But I mean, all of these questions, emotions, things doing enough for a different for a purpose, but for the purpose of doing it itself, and all of these things are very, very related to questions that you're going to have when you actually develop products. So, yeah, I enjoyed the conversation. I don't know what the job is, to be honest, but
I don't either.
Yeah, I noticed you conveniently avoided answering
exactly.
that. Well, we'll probably just leave it for next time then. Okay, so well, thank you very much, Jan and Scott, for what I thought was a really interesting conversation. And okay, so this concludes today's Product Quest podcast. So if you're still listening, please consider subscribing and giving us a positive rating on your podcast app. You can send any comments or ideas for future shows to productquestpodcast@gmail.com. See you next time.
Of course they're still listening. Who wouldn't want to listen to 2 hours
Yeah.
talking about our emotions?
Of course they're still listening.